Early in its existence, IQT began investing in biotechnology with an emphasis on understanding and developing capabilities that meet the mission needs of our government partners. In 2015, IQT established the B.Next practice, recognizing that in addition to developing mission capabilities, there was a need to tackle the rising threats of pandemics and to harness emerging technologies in biology and healthcare. Well before COVID-19, B.Next developed a robust technology architecture for pandemic preparedness that included digital disease surveillance, rapid vaccine development, and synthetic biology for diagnostics and therapeutics. Through strategic investments in promising startups, IQT has helped define a new industrial base for biodefense, emphasizing national security, economic resilience, and public health. Welcome to IQT Explains, a series on the IQT Podcast where we explore global technology trends and their impact on national security to provide you with insights and unique perspectives. I'm your host, Farid Nemri, and today we're kicking off a three-part podcast series covering IQT's investments and activity in the bio domain. Today's episode will focus on IQT's origin story in bio. To get things started, I'll introduce today's guests, Dr. Megan Anderson and Dr. Kevin O'Connell. Megan has been with IQT for 14 years and is the Executive Vice President of Capabilities. She is responsible for implementing a strategic roadmap to deliver high-impact technical solutions across the national security community. Megan oversees IQT's technology practices, the portfolio success team, the project engineering team, and the applied research and rapid prototyping groups. Megan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Farid. It's glad to be here.
Kevin has been with IQT for 17 years and is a Senior Vice President on IQT's technical staff, responsible for vetting and overseeing IQT's investments in the life sciences. His focus areas include understanding customer needs in synthetic biology, biological sample preparation, purification and analysis, and matching them to the best technology emerging from the venture-backed biotech startup community. Kevin, thank you for joining us today as well.
Thanks, Farid. I'm excited to be here. It's great to be back on the IQT podcast. After a hiatus, my colleague Dylan George and I had made several podcasts during pandemic time, and it was really quite rewarding to do that. So great to be here.
Absolutely. I've listened to some of those even before joining IQT. So I recommend for those who are interested to go and visit our website and our podcast and check them out.
Thanks for the plug.
Of course. I'm really excited to converse with you today and learn about IQT's origin story. So Megan, I'll start with you. Before we get into the details of things and all the activity we've been up to in this space, let's define for our listeners the time frame we're referring to in this first episode of our three-part series.
Yeah, happy to, Farid. So I think the best way to think about this is what the geopolitical landscape is in the time that I'm talking about. So we started our bio efforts back post 9/11, and this is where the government was very focused on counterterrorism missions. So looking at what is going on and how do you start addressing that space, specifically looking at how do you take technologies out into the field, how do you do things in a rapid manner, and how do you make technology really available to our government partners wherever they are and when they need it. So we'll talk about our efforts that we have done in the post 9/11 days and then go up to what we have done around pandemic preparedness, another big focus that IQT has looked at over the past years.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Fantastic. And a lot has unfolded in those 20 years. So Kevin, as we looking at this backdrop of the 20 years we'll focus on post 9/11 up until the pandemic, what were these the main priorities or technology area focuses that IQT has paid attention to or invested in? And what were the challenges we were trying to address as we do so?
So Megan is spot on with the focus on the post 9/11 era and 9/11 as a point in time. Immediately after 9/11, of course, there was the anthrax letter attacks, and so the national security community obviously was very concerned in the biology space about further biological attacks, and so all of the technology areas that Megan mentioned, being able to do things faster, do it more accurately, do it less expensive, do it in a field-forward manner. These were all things that were very much on our mind. Also, even for those analyses that would require a laboratory, how can we we thought a lot about increasing the throughput of analyses. How many more tests can we do in parallel to get to critical answers faster? So, in this realm of sample analysis, so there's the literal sample analysis. What is in the sample that I'm holding here? Typically, that's either an analysis of DNA or proteins, either of which can be a signal for what organism is in my sample. Is it anthrax? Is it something else? But before the analysis, there's often what we call a sample preparation step. You have to purify this DNA or this protein, and you want to do that as quickly and as efficiently as possible from any number of we call them sample matrices, but from the sample types, either soil or clothing or whatever whatever else may come into the mission space. And then if you can't do your analysis at the site of collection, then you need a means of collecting and a means of preserving the sample until you can get it to a place where you can perform this analysis. And so these were the broad areas in which we were investing. The other interesting thing is that the underlying science of analysis of a biological sample is very similar to what happens in the diagnostics laboratory. Many of the techniques are fundamentally the same. However, in the diagnostics laboratory, you know what the target is you're looking for, and you have designed your test for that, and that knowledge is baked into the literal test. Because of the nature of our government partners' work, they were not always eager to divulge what they are looking for, and so we needed to a challenge that we had was investing in technologies that allow the government partner to bring their own knowledge of the putative sample, right, and place that chemistry within the technology themselves. And so, if one looks at our portfolio, you'll notice that the companies that we invested in have such sort of open architecture technologies.
That makes sense. And as you recall what kind of ventures were around during those days, how robust was the community, the startup community, addressing those challenges?
Not very, I have to say. While sample prep technologies are critical, you need good prep and you need good analysis. There's a lot more money to be made in biotech in therapeutics, and even medical diagnostics are a harder field for investing. So when you place the things I said earlier about not baking in the pre-knowledge of the target into the technology, plus the relatively the much smaller number of companies available to invest in vis-a-vis therapeutics, say, we had to be creative, and we had to be, we had to dig deep to find the right companies to invest in.
Certainly. And, considering this open architecture companies, but also other companies that we've invested in this time frame, post-11 up until the pandemic, what are some examples of the companies we've invested in that our listeners might be interested in learning about, or even checking them out if they still exist in that form?
Well, we always invest in the hopes that the company will persist through time, of course. Otherwise, the government can't source the technology.
Certainly.
Yeah. But so one such company in the realm of human biometrics is a company called InteGenX. That company is basically, for those who are fans of the CSI TV series, this is a DNA laboratory that with the entire laboratory, 5 or 6 different functionalities in the laboratory, plus the lab technician, all baked into a single benchtop appliance. And this technology is broadly called rapid DNA technology because you can take the sample, like a cheek swab from a person, and drop it into a cartridge and hit the go button. And 90 minutes later, the DNA profile in the format that law enforcement uses, for instance, this profile is generated.
Wow.
And it
impressive stuff. Yeah.
It was, and it was not difficult. It was not. I was just say it was quite difficult to pull this off. It was a significant engineering integration task to build the lab tech, if you will, function into the box.
And for our listeners to get a visual,
Yes.
if you imagine taking an entire laboratory and getting it into a big box, that's what we were able to accomplish with that investment, which really changes how the government can use the technology in the field.
Absolutely. The one of the CSI series episodes actually featured one of these instruments, and they had it in the back of a Suburban. So that was kind of the use case that was envisioned in that TV show. But that company,
I'm gonna look that up.
Yes,
I'll watch that episode.
That company was later purchased by Thermo Fisher, and the device that they made around the time of our investment is now, it's the version 1 of that, which is no longer commercially available. But at Thermo Fisher, you can find the current generation of these instruments that are there right now, and so that was. Investing in the company to do that was very interesting to us.
Absolutely.
One other company I'll mention here. I'll mention 2 other things quickly. We were early investors in Ginkgo Bioworks, a synthetic biology company whose technology is intended to bring all the creativity of molecular biology in this realm that we now call synthetic biology, engineering very complex traits that are useful industrially into microorganisms to make good and useful products. And we invested in them for the purpose of gaining insight into how this technology is being used commercially, and what were the areas commercially in which they were going to have greatest traction. And so how is this going to impact the U.S. economy broadly? So we've remained close to the Ginkgo team. They've been guests on our podcast in the past. Plug again there. And then I'll move on to talk a little bit about DNA synthesis. I mentioned this field of synthetic biology. Fundamentally, there are 3 things that you need to do to be a good synthetic biologist. You have to be able to read DNA quickly. You need to be able to write your information that you design into DNA, and then you need to be able to edit DNA in organisms. And so DNA synthesis is the middle one of these. It's the writing information into DNA. And that capability is so fundamental that we have been tracking that capability commercially for several years. And we have made, some years ago, we made an investment in that field, which we maintain, and we have learned a great deal through our partnership with that company.
And when I look across our portfolio, the other area that really stands out in the earlier years of IQT's bio work is the investments we've made around pandemic preparedness. And I think this is really important to note because we were investing ahead of COVID. And this was because it was an area we saw something is going to, the nation needs to be paying more attention to this area. So all of the commercial opportunities we found where we saw really interesting cutting edge technology in that space, we leaned forward and invested in those companies to support the ecosystem and see what we could learn and gather insights around how this technology was evolving. So I think that's been a really interesting part of our portfolio that has definitely helped us approach when the pandemic came, how to talk to our government partners, how to talk to leadership in the country on that topic.
Absolutely. And as someone who's lived through the pandemic, I am thankful for all of IQT's efforts there. But Megan, that actually is a good segue for one of the questions I wanted to address, because especially when it comes to these immediate real-time needs and challenges that our government partners are living through, and IQT's role in addressing them through the technology capabilities out there, it's quite the task and a feat for us to balance the the existing immediate needs and address them in real time, but also keep what you mentioned is staying ahead of the curve and anticipate what other challenges may be coming up. How does IQT does that? Because as an insider, I know we do it pretty well. Let's share with our listeners, how do we manage those competing priorities in our model and approach?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Farid, and something we've spent a lot of time refining how we are the most effective for our government partners in this space. And one of the key tenets that I go back to is IQT does architectural investing. So we take time to understand what is the architectural landscape in a different technology sector in understanding where is technology today, what are the bottlenecks, what's working, what doesn't work, what would be a game changer down the road. And we do two different types of investing. We do, as you mentioned, we invest to deliver capabilities near real time to our government partners to apply to their mission needs. That's always been a driver of what we are doing. And our bio area is a really good example of the second area we've leaned into. And we've been doing this for quite a while now, is we invest ahead of the mission need in a number of scenarios. And what we do when we're looking at that is watching the commercial market evolve over time. You can see a lot of trends, and we talk to 1,000 companies every year. So we've got a pretty good sense of where technology is going. And you can start to identify what the disruptors are going to be. And if we put on our hats of thinking about our government partners, we start to say some of these technologies are going to be really important to our government partners in the future. They may not be mature enough to use today. They may not be incorporated into government use cases today, but there's things that we just have a sense of these are going to be very important. And we make small investments in these companies, and we do that to form a relationship with the company. And through that relationship, we can watch as the technology is developed. We can see when the right opportunity for the government is to engage with the companies. And it helps us really make a portfolio of technologies that can really be used to address different mission needs. But it allows us to interact in the near real time with government partners to deliver things today, but also be looking 2 years down the road. Where do we want to go, and how do we find the right companies and help drive that ecosystem so those companies are available for our government partners?
Absolutely. And from my understanding, sometimes in the bio domain, things can be capital intensive. And as we look ahead of the curve and want to manage the competitive edge and maintain it for our government partners, how do we see the venture community and venture capital in general reacting to that? Are they also investing and taking the risk sometimes ahead of its time, or do we think we need to reimagine things as a nation and deploy more support there?
That's a loaded question, Farid. So I would say there's a couple pieces that come to mind when I think about. So the first is, because IQT has been around for 25 years and we've been investing, and we do this in partnership with our government partners who know they use the technology. So IQT, looking at the market perspective, is a really good indicator of where we're seeing future government needs for technologies. And we co-invest with many in the venture capital community because they see us as kind of a good housekeeping seal of approval. We do very deep technical diligence on companies. We do deep business and financial diligence as well. So we feel comfortable with the investments that we're making are going to be successful for our government partners. And the venture community sees that, and they oftentimes work with us and say, you're seeing some really good leading technology here. That's great. Let's take a deeper look at that technology. And I think in terms of what we've seen over the past 25 years is we work with many investors. We've co-invested with thousands of venture firms out there, which is great to see. And that all helps benefit our national security community. And I think the other key piece that when I think about this is IQT is investing to enhance commercial technology. We're not trying to make government-specific technologies. And in the biospace in particular, if you can make commercial technologies that can be used for therapeutics design, but could also help our government partners, that's a great outcome for the companies as well as our government partners. So we help kind of develop the market to make sure there's more technologies that are commercially viable and available to our partners.
Absolutely. Kevin, I'll go to you now. You touched on this a little bit, and with Megan also emphasizing how we do, different kinds of investments for different outcomes. What we care about here at IQT is continuous learning and knowledge generation. Could you share with us a little bit more on, how we do that and how we specifically have done that in the time frame of, early 2000 up until the pandemic?
Sure. The pandemic preparedness work that we've done is a great example of that. And Megan has mentioned the architectural approach. So the B.Next team in the years prior to the pandemic had constructed an architectural diagram, if you will, of technologies that would form a nascent industrial base to better prepare the U.S. for pandemic preparedness or, God forbid, an intentional bioattack. And we had sort of four very broad buckets. We had a detection or diagnosis bucket, one having to do with treatment, another one having to do with prevention, And then a fourth one that undergirded the other three was data and analysis. Okay, there's all that. Those who maybe ever get to see an IQT architecture will always find a data and analysis layer kind of foundational to all the things that we do. But in filling out that architecture with investments in these various sectors, we invested in companies that were doing population scale health surveillance, CRISPR-based diagnostics, novel means of vaccine design, novel means of vaccine delivery. I think that's a particularly interesting topic. Why on earth are we still using 18th century technology, the syringe and a needle to administer vaccines when we have the means to? There is technology now that would allow you to send a vaccine in the form of a bandage through the mail and administer it very broadly, and to do so very quickly. So we gave a lot of thought to these things. You mentioned the venture community. In the days immediately as we understood the pandemic was going to be a very significant event, to put it mildly, a great deal of effort in the whole biotech community, large and small, venture, big companies and venture-backed small startups, pivoted to driving their technology to serve the COVID response mission, and smaller companies did this, and obviously, the smaller the company, the harder it is to have a nation-scale impact there, right? Mm-hmm. But a great deal of money also flowed from both the government and also from the investors of startup companies into this response. Since the ebbing of the pandemic, however, that pandemic-driven investment rate has dried up significantly, and this is another phenomenon that the folks in public health call part of the panic neglect cycle. So we panicked, so to speak, put a bunch of money into COVID product development, and now, having done so, the market for COVID related products is significantly less than it was, and now all of these biotech companies are now having to repivot back and focus on markets that they can serve, and hopefully they live long enough that they remain part of the industrial base that's available for us to tap for future outbreaks, which one will inevitably recur at some point.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely interesting to hear how things have evolved and how we've approached this in the early days as the bio focus emerged at IQT. And it's fantastic to start with the history here and for our listeners to, for us to walk them through it. Because in the upcoming podcast, we'll focus on, the present, what has been unfolding since the pandemic, and then the future and how we keep this, a strategic, ahead of the curve eye towards things.
I wanted to just offer one last thought to fully answer your question. You mentioned about the learning piece. In-Q-Tel invests, as Megan said, in part also to learn. And so through that investing in filling out that architecture of pandemic preparedness-related companies, we learned a great deal about the market, about the state of the technology, its readiness, the difficulties and that companies face in bringing their technologies to market through regulatory clearances, through the FDA and so on. And all of that has served us very well in the investing that we've done since then, which will, again, be the subject of the next two podcasts.
Yes. So for those of you who are listening, hopefully this is keeping you enthusiastic and excited about the two additional parts we'll be going through, and the next one focusing on the present and 2020 to these days, 2024. I still think that that we are in much better days since the pandemic, but we're still living through its aftermath. So it's hard to talk about it just in the past, because we are still living through its aftermath, as I mentioned. But we'll have different focus areas next time around. And I want to thank our listeners, and I want to thank you, Kevin and Megan, for joining me today on this episode of IQT Explains. Please tune tune in next week to catch part 2 of the 3-part bio series, where we're going to explore more and more about biotechnology and IQT's investment and activity in the area. And to ensure that you don't miss any updates or exciting topics, please make sure to subscribe to the IQT podcast and leave us a review or comment to let us know what you think, what content you'd be interested in. And if I missed any good questions, keep me accountable as your host, and I'm happy to cover those in some upcoming podcasts as well. To make sure that you're also up to date with all things IQT, please visit our website, IQT.org. That's an easy one, www.iqt.org, to explore more content and learn about our global investment platform that helps accelerate the introduction of groundbreaking technologies. To explore more content and learn about IQT's global investment platform that accelerates the introduction of groundbreaking technologies to enhance the national security and prosperity of America and its allies. Thank you.
Thank you, Farid.
Thanks, Farid.